I want to speak tonight to the part of you that is tired, not the surface tiredness that a good night of sleep can fix. I am speaking to something deeper than that. The tiredness that lives beneath your words when you tell people you are fine. The specific exhaustion of someone who has done everything right, or tried to, who has read the books and listened to the lectures and written the affirmations and sat in the silence and visualized until the images behind their closed eyes were as familiar as the walls of their own bedroom. And still the thing they want has not come. The relationship has not healed. The money has not arrived. The door that was supposed to open is not only closed, but appears to have been sealed from the other side. You have begun quietly in the most private room of your own mind to wonder if you are the exception, if the law works for everyone except somehow, inexplicably, you. You have watched other people share their testimonies, their sudden reversals, their miracles arriving in 2 weeks or 10 days, and something in you has smiled for them while something else, something you do not like to acknowledge, has whispered, but not me, never quite me. I want you to hear what I am about to say, not as consolation. I am not here tonight to comfort you with vague assurances that your time is coming, that the universe has a plan, that everything happens for a reason. I am here to tell you something precise, something that will fundamentally change how you understand what has been happening, and more importantly, what you must do now. Because the answer to why nothing is working is not what you think it is. And once you see it, truly see it, you will understand that you have not been failing at manifestation. You have been succeeding at something you did not intend to create. And that distinction is everything. Here is the principle. The law of assumption does not respond to your desire. It responds to your state. And a state, in the full meaning of that word, is not what you think about occasionally or what you affirm in the morning. A state is the total atmosphere of your consciousness. It is the assumption you are living inside, the one so familiar it no longer feels like an assumption at all. It feels like simply the way things are. The law takes that atmosphere, that invisible climate of your inner world, and it clothes it in physical form with absolute mathematical precision. It cannot do otherwise. It has no preference, no opinion, no interest in whether the state you are occupying is the one you have chosen or the one you drifted into by default. It simply builds the outer world from the inner one, every time, without exception. Now here is where people go wrong, and it is a subtle error, but it costs them everything. They believe they have changed their state because they have changed their words. They begin saying new things, thinking new thoughts, performing the internal rituals of assumption, and on the surface of their consciousness, something genuinely does shift. But underneath that surface, deeper than the affirmations, deeper than the visualizations, in the place where the actual creative work is being done, the old state remains completely intact. And the old state always wins. Not because it is stronger, but because it is more real to them. Because they believe it more. Because when they stop performing the new inner conversation and simply exist for a moment, the atmosphere of their consciousness is still the atmosphere of the person who does not have what they want, who is not sure it will ever come, who has tried and seen nothing move. And so you have two conversations happening simultaneously. The one you are consciously practicing and the one that runs beneath it like a river beneath ice, cold, certain, and entirely in charge. The law hears the river. The river is your actual state. And until the river changes, the outer world will not change, no matter how beautifully composed your affirmations are. Let me tell you about a man named David. He was in his early 40s, a quiet and thoughtful man who had come to this teaching with more earnestness than almost anyone I have encountered. He had been trying to manifest the recovery of his failing business for 14 months. He had done everything. He maintained a nightly practice without missing a single evening. He visualized the thriving business. He repeated his affirmations with discipline. He listened to lectures on his commute and underlined passages in books and journaled with diligence. 14 months, and the business continued to decline. Each month the numbers were worse. He came to me not with anger, but with something more difficult than anger. He came with the quiet devastation of a man who has done everything he was asked to do and still arrived at nothing. I asked him one question, not about his practice, not about his technique. I asked him what he felt in the moments between the practices, when he was not actively visualizing, not in his evening session, not reciting his affirmations, but simply living, simply sitting in his car or eating his lunch or lying in bed waiting for sleep. What was the atmosphere of those moments? It was quiet for a long time. And then he said honestly that those moments felt like dread, like the particular dread of a man watching something he built slowly come apart and not being able to stop it. He said that underneath everything, underneath all the work he was doing, there was a sensation he could only describe as the feeling of someone who has already lost, who is simply waiting for the outer world to confirm what he knows inside. That was his state. Not the visualization, the dread, and the law, indifferent and precise, had been faithfully delivering the experience of that dread into his physical world for 14 months. We did not change his practice. We changed his state. And the difference is enormous. I told him that the practice was not the problem. The problem was what the practice was floating on top of. You cannot build a new reality on the foundation of an unchanged state. You must change the ground first. The building follows. I asked him to stop, for the time being, all the formal practice. No visualization, no affirmation, no evening session. Instead, I asked him to do one thing only, to notice throughout the day every moment when the dread surfaced, and instead of pushing past it or covering it with new thoughts, to simply ask himself, what would this moment feel like if it were already resolved? Not to force an answer, just to ask, to let the imagination touch the feeling of resolution, however briefly, however lightly. Within 3 weeks, the first movement came. A client he had written off called and reinstated their contract. A week after that, an unexpected line of credit was extended. By the end of the second month, the business had not only stabilized, but had begun to move in a direction that within the following year made those 14 months of struggle seem like preparation rather than defeat. Nothing in the external world had changed when he made the shift. Everything in his inner atmosphere had changed, and the outer world, as it always does, followed. Now I want to take you deeper into this, because there is a layer to what I am describing that most people never reach, and it is the layer where the real power lives. You have been told, and correctly, to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. But there is a quality of assumption that almost no one discusses, and without it the assumption remains thin, unconvincing even to the one doing the assuming, and it produces nothing. That quality is naturalness. The feeling of the wish fulfilled must feel natural, not triumphant, not ecstatic, not the feeling of someone who has just won something. The feeling of someone for whom the desired reality is simply, quietly, utterly normal. Think of it this way. A wealthy person does not walk around in a constant state of amazement at their wealth. They do not feel the thrill of having money every moment. Money is simply the ordinary texture of their life. It is the water they swim in without thinking about the water. When you assume the state of abundance and it feels exciting, feels like a victory, feels like something you achieve, you are still inhabiting the consciousness of someone outside that state looking at it with longing. The excitement itself is evidence of the distance. True assumption feels quiet. It feels settled. It feels like coming home to something that was always yours. This is what Scripture means in the letter to the Philippians, where Paul writes, I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. This contentment, this settled ease is not resignation. It is the mark of a consciousness that has genuinely entered its desired state. The word content here does not mean satisfied with less. It means at home in the state, fully occupying it, not visited, living there. A woman named Caroline came to me carrying a desire that had been with her for 6 years. She wanted simply to be a mother. She had been through the medical procedures, the heartbreak, the months of hope followed by months of grief, the well-meaning advice of people who did not understand. She had come to this teaching and tried to assume the state of being a mother. But every time she entered the visualization, she said there was an edge to it, an intensity, a need, a desperation underneath the image that even as she sat with the imagined child in her arms, never quite let her forget that the child was not real yet, that this was a practice, that she was reaching for something just beyond her hand, that reaching, that quality of straining toward the desire, was the atmosphere of her state. And it was the atmosphere of someone who does not have the thing. No matter how beautiful the visualization, the emotional current running beneath it was absent. And the law heard the current. I told her to release the formal practice entirely. No more visualizing the child. Instead, I asked her to spend 2 weeks doing nothing but living from the assumption in its quietest form. Not imagining holding a baby, but simply letting the texture of her daily inner conversation carry the assumption the way a mother's naturally would. Noticing things and thinking, I'll have to remember this for when the children are older. Walking past the school and feeling not longing but a quiet, ordinary sense of connection. Relating to other mothers not from the outside looking in, but from inside the shared understanding of parenthood. No drama, no effort, just the calm, ordinary quality of a woman for whom motherhood is simply a fact of her life. 8 weeks later, she called me. She was pregnant, naturally, after 6 years. Now I want to address directly the objection I hear most often when I teach what I have just described. And it comes in several forms, but they all say the same thing. They say, but isn't this just positive thinking? Isn't this just pretending? If I walk around assuming something that isn't true, am I not simply deceiving myself, living in a fantasy while the real situation goes unaddressed? I want to answer this with the full seriousness it deserves. What you call the real situation, what appears to you as the solid and immovable truth of your current circumstances, is not what you think it is. It is not the bedrock of reality. It is the outer picturing of an inner state that has been maintained largely unconsciously for months or years or in some cases decades. It is already in the truest sense a manifestation. It is already the product of assumption. The only question is whether the assumption that produced it was one you chose deliberately or one you drifted into by default. Your current circumstances are not reality. They are a report. They are yesterday's inner state made visible today. And a report can be revised. The revision happens not by changing the outer circumstances, which you cannot directly do, but by changing the inner state that produces them. In the letter to the Romans it is written, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. This is not a metaphor for positive thinking. It is a precise technical instruction. The world, meaning the outer world of circumstances and conditions, is asking you to conform to it, to let it define your inner state, to take its report as your reality and adjust your inner conversation accordingly. The instruction is to refuse that conformity, to renew the mind instead, to change the state, and from the changed state watch the world, which had seemed so fixed and final, reshape itself completely. This is not pretending. This is understanding at the deepest level what you actually are and how the world you inhabit actually works. Let me tell you about a man I will call Thomas. He was 63 years old, recently retired, and in what he described as a complete and total state of estrangement from his adult daughter. They had not spoken in 4 years. The silence between them had grown so solid that he had quietly, privately stopped believing it could change. He had tried to reach out in the early days. He had written letters. He had left voicemails that were never returned. And eventually the reaching had stopped. He told me that he had accepted it, that he had made peace with it. But as he said those words, I could hear what was underneath them. He had not made peace. He had collapsed. He had let the outer circumstance rewrite his inner state so completely that he had abandoned the desire entirely, not through genuine peace, but through the particular defeat that disguises itself as acceptance. He began to work with what I have described tonight, not the formal practice, not the ambitious visualization, simply the quiet, steady, stubborn naturalness of a father who is in relationship with his daughter. Not a father who wants to be, or who is trying to be, or who hopes someday to be, a father who simply is. He let small things carry the assumption. He bought a book he thought she would love without the weight of longing behind the gesture, just the ordinary paternal impulse of a man who knows his daughter well. He found himself thinking as he watched a film that she would have something sharp and funny to say about that particular scene. Not painfully, not with longing, just naturally the way a father thinks. 11 days, that was all. 11 days after he shifted the ground of his inner state, his daughter called him. She did not explain the years of silence. She did not offer an apology he had given up expecting. She simply called and talked for 2 hours, and the relationship that had been sealed shut for 4 years opened again as if it had never been closed at all. The outer world did not know what had happened in the interior of this man's consciousness. It simply responded, as it always does, to the state he was occupying. Now I want to share with you something that most people who study this teaching miss entirely. And it is this: the state you are trying to assume must feel like a relief, not an achievement. This is the hidden distinction that separates the manifestation that comes quickly and naturally from the one that is perpetually just out of reach. When the assumption feels like an achievement, like something you have climbed to, something you have earned through discipline and practice, it carries within it the memory of the climb. It carries the trace of the effort. And effort belongs to the person who is outside the thing they want, straining toward it. But when the assumption feels like a relief, like the setting down of a burden you have carried too long, like the exhale after years of held breath, then you have genuinely shifted. Then the new state is not something you are trying to inhabit. It is something you have recognized as home. This is what is meant in the Gospel of Matthew when Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." The rest is not a reward given after you have successfully completed your practice. The rest is the practice. The rest is the state. When you stop straining, stop pushing, stop the effort for reaching toward the desire, and simply settle into the quiet ground of its already being so, that settling is the assumption. That is the shift the law is waiting for. And when it comes, when it genuinely comes, and not just as a performance of release, but as an actual interior arriving, the manifestation does not merely quicken. It becomes inevitable. Let me tell you about a woman named Miriam. She was a writer. She had been trying to manifest the success of her first book for 2.5 years. She had done the work of writing, but more than that, she had done the work, as she understood it, of assuming. She had visualized book signs. She had imagined the review. She had scripted the moment of the offer from the publisher. 2.5 years, and nothing had moved. When we spoke, I did not ask her about her practice. I asked her how she felt when she was not practicing, and she said something that struck me immediately. She said that she felt as though she were carrying the book, that it was a weight she was responsible for, that the success of it depended on the force of her wanting and the discipline of her practice, and that if she ever let go, ever stopped maintaining the assumption with deliberate effort, it would fall. That is not assumption, that is control. And the state underneath it was not the state of a successful author. It was the state of someone terrified of failing. The visualization was dressed in the clothes of success, but the feeling underneath was the feeling of someone clinging to a ledge. I gave her one instruction: put the book down. Not literally, but internally. Let it go. Stop maintaining it. Stop carrying it. Assume just for a moment, and then for longer than a moment, that the book is already exactly where it is meant to be, that it does not need you to push it there, that your only remaining relationship to it is the warm and easy pride of someone whose work has found its place in the world. Nothing to do, nothing to maintain, just the settled, relieved, quietly joyful consciousness of a woman whose book is already a success. Within 6 weeks, she had an offer from a publisher she had considered entirely out of reach. And she told me that the strangest part was that the offer came in the period when she had entirely stopped thinking about the book. Not because she had given up on the desire, but because she had genuinely, for the first time, stopped carrying it. Now let me give you the practice for tonight. Not a formal visualization, not an affirmation sequence. Something quieter and more powerful than either. Tonight, when you lie down and the room goes dark and the day finally releases its grip on you, do not immediately reach for any practice. Do not begin to visualize. Do not start constructing your scene. Instead, do this one thing. Feel around inside your consciousness for the weight you are carrying about your desire. You know exactly what I mean. The specific tension, the particular place where the desire has become a burden rather than a joy. The place where wanting has curdled into worry, where hope has been so long deferred that it now contains within itself the faint taste of resignation. Find that weight, and then, as gently as you would set down something fragile, set it down, not by giving up on the desire, not by surrendering the wish, but by separating the desire from the strain of maintaining it. Let the desire remain. Release the maintenance. Let yourself feel for just a moment the relief of not carrying it. The extraordinary, ordinary peace of someone who has arrived after a very long journey and can finally stop walking. From that place of release, let your inner conversation drift naturally toward the reality you desire, not as a construction, not as a performance, but as the natural thought of someone who has come home. It might be as simple as a feeling of ease, a sense of rightness, the quiet inner knowing that what you want is not coming toward you from a distance, but is already the atmosphere of your consciousness in this moment. Stay in that place as long as you can. Do not force it to remain. If it dissolves, let it dissolve without judgment and simply return. The falling asleep from that state, however briefly you touched it, is among the most powerful creative acts available to you. The deeper mind that takes over as consciousness loosens its grip does not evaluate or question. It simply receives and creates. Give it the state of relief, the state of arrival, the state of someone who has put down the weight and found beneath it exactly what they were looking for. And it will build tomorrow from that blueprint. My friend, I want to close tonight with this. The thing that is not working is not the law. The law has never failed and cannot fail. What has not been working is the state from which you have been practicing. The effort, the pushing, the maintaining, the desperate discipline of someone who is trying to force reality to move. These belong to the consciousness of the person outside their desire. And the law, faithful as it always is, has been delivering the experience of that consciousness back to you with absolute precision. The shift required of you tonight is not more practice. It is less of the wrong kind. It is the willingness to release the weight of maintaining your desire and simply rest in the assumption that it is already so. Not because you have achieved the assumption, but because you have finally understood that straining toward the desire is itself the evidence that you believe you are still without it. In the Psalms it is written, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still, not be louder, not be more disciplined, not try harder, be still. And in that stillness, in the releasing of all the effort and the maintenance and the fearful doing, discover what has been true all along, that the I am you are is already whole, already complete, already in possession of everything it has been straining toward, that the desire you carry was never something outside you waiting to arrive. It was always the call of your own completed self asking you to stop looking out and start living in. Nothing is working because nothing needs to work. The law is not a mechanism you operate from the outside. It is the nature of the consciousness you are. You do not make it function. You align with it. And alignment is not effort. It is rest. It is recognition. It is coming home. Change the state tonight. Not the practice, not the words, not the technique, the ground, the atmosphere, the invisible climate of the inner world from which all outer things are built. Put down the weight, feel the relief of having arrived, and let the world, which has always been nothing more than your inner life made visible, rearrange itself around the new truth you have chosen to occupy. That is the law. That is the promise. That is the only thing that has ever needed to change. I'll see you again in the next.